introduce to you today Mel Martinez. He's the chairman of Southeast U.S. and Latin America for JP Chase and Company. After more than a decade of public service, Mel joined JPMorgan Chase in July 2010, based in Florida. He represents the firm to clients throughout the Americas, from individuals and businesses to large corporations, governments, and nonprofit organizations. Mel was elected to the United States Senate in 2004, representing Florida as U.S. Senator. Mel served on several committees, including Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, and Armed Services. While serving in the Senate, Mel had led efforts to reform Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and was a trusted voice on foreign policy throughout the Western Hemisphere. Prior to his time in the Senate, Mel served as the 12th Secretary of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. As the first Cuban American to serve in the President's cabinet, he became known for his efforts to increase home ownership for all Americans and his aggressive efforts to end chronic homelessness. Mel also served as mayor of Orange County, Florida, and practiced law for 25 years. He received both his BS and JD degrees from Florida State University. In addition to his role with JPMorgan Chase, he is actively involved in housing policy reform discussions as co-chair of a bipartisan Policy Center's Housing Commission. Mel also serves on the boards of Marriott Vacation Worldwide as lead director and NVR Inc. Mel and his wife Kitty reside in Orlando, and they have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. Let's give a St. Cloud welcome to Mel Martinez.
Thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure to be with all of you here today. I appreciate the chance to get out with my son, and I usually have to buy him lunch to get him out, so this is good. You all brought lunch, and so thank you. So it's great to be with John, but it's great to be with all of you as well. I used to come down here every now and then when I was mayor, and then, of course, I was asking your votes at one point or another in the year 2004, which, believe it or not, was 10 years ago when I was running for the Senate. And what a different country, what a different world we live in each and every day that passes, and certainly exciting times for all of us in this great state and great nation. I was told perhaps I should tell you a little something about how I got here. By that I mean how I got to the US of A. And some of you may have heard snippets of the story, and I won't belabor it too long. But I think it's important before we talk about Washington and the dysfunction in our government, that I maybe tell you a little something about what's right about America. And here's my story in about 3 to 5 minutes version of it. And by the way, I really do hope that at the conclusion of my remarks, or really frankly at any point, we can engage in conversation and you feel free to ask questions, because that'll make it even more interesting, I hope. So as a young boy living in Cuba in the late 1950s, we had a lot of upheaval and change as a result of a revolution that was supposed to do a lot of great things, but in fact turned out to be a communist revolution. And as a result of that, a lot of things came with it, including the loss of all freedoms, the loss of private property rights, and the loss of religious freedom. Along with that came the closing of the Catholic school I had gone to all my life, frankly the same school my father had gone to. But with this now new sheriff in town, if you will, religious tolerance was not part of the program. And so the school was closed. As a result of a lot of these things happening at a very traumatic time in world history, which is the height of the Cold War, my parents made a very difficult decision, which was to send me out of the country. I was 15 at the time, in the care of the Catholic Church, and having great faith and trust in 2 institutions, the United States and the church. And so I was full participant in that decision, even at that young age. But it was an incredible act of love on my parents' part to take that step, to take that moment of saying, yes, we will part with our child that we love so much because we love him enough that we want him to have a better life. Now, I was not supposed to be partying for, I left there in February of '62, so it's been now 52 years. It wasn't supposed to be that long. My parents were fully convinced that it was a matter of a few months until something would change and that the regime that was in power would not any longer be so. And so with that hope and faith, I came to America as a young 15-year-old, quite confused, and lived in a couple of camps for some months. Ultimately was placed in a foster home in Orlando in June of 1962. And I went to school in Orlando. I was sent to the Catholic High School at Bishop Moore and graduated from there. But as time went on, the separation from my parents became every day more painful. Events in the world took over the attention, the missile crisis between the United States and Cuba, which so many of you are too young to remember, which was seared in my life as part of who I was and what occurred around the time of this separation from my parents. My parents were living in Cuba, I'm living here. Cuba has nuclear missiles. The United States is at an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with the Soviet Union, and my family is but a pawn in this play that is taking place all around us. Ultimately, it was concluded peacefully, thankfully. And in 1966, I was reunited with my parents. They were able to come, and we were reunited in Orlando, and my father, who was a veterinarian, began to make a lot of trips to St. Cloud. We went to work for T.G. Lee Dairy back in the days when, you know, the dominant issue in our Central Florida community was really agriculture. And so, with that, we began our life in America now as a family, trying to reconnect and reunite. I was 19. I helped them get resettled. My father was able to get a job. I had already made some inroads in that, and he went to work, and life has become the life of what it's been for so many others, a life of living in freedom, in a land of opportunity, in a place where all are welcome and have an opportunity to thrive and succeed and make a better life for themselves. I had always strongly imprinted in my brain that education was a big part of how you got ahead in life. And so I not only learned English, because I came with very, very little command of the language. I played sports, which allowed me to really understand and become one of the guys and learn the culture. I also learned other parts of the English language I wasn't taught in school. But that was all part of growing up. We had to be ready to go up to Florida State. And so in any event, I got my education. I came back to Orlando to practice law. And then, of course, imbued with a sense of debt and gratitude to this great country, I really felt like I needed to do something to give back. So I gave back in a number of ways. I participated in a lot of civic activities like so many of you are involved with. I was on the board of the chamber. I was fortunate enough to get to serve on the board of Orlando Utilities, and we have some OUC people here today. We started calling it the Reliable One, and it's still the Reliable One, and I was so pleased that we made a deal with you to have us continue our service into this part of the state. And so anyway, it was a wonderful story and a wonderful life, but I always had a sense that you had to give back, that in our society, what makes it great and what really makes it unique is the fact that Americans, back to the days of Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in the time of the American Revolution, and he talked about the uniqueness of the American character, which is that people build communities, and that these communities were successful because the people were willing to be a part of that community and to give it themselves to make it better. And so, you know, from griping in a corner about what's wrong with government, to one day saying, well, you know, I need to do something myself, and maybe I can make a difference, maybe I can give some help. Now, I had no idea that all that would transpire over the next dozen years would ever take place. I really started out just to run for mayor of Orlando because a lot of people thought, of Orange County, forgive me, because a lot of people thought I could do a good job and I was a good person for it and I could really maybe help my community. And that's really what I set out to do. And I did it with a certain sense that I was going to do the best that I could, and that I wasn't necessarily wedded to a life of political life, and that I wasn't necessarily going to do everything geared to what the next election held, but I was just going to do what I thought was right for the community, and what I thought was right for my family, for John, and for John's children to grow up in a community that we all wanted to be a part of. And so that's kind of how I set out to do that. And so that gets you sometimes into some controversies, you know, like deciding that maybe perhaps we shouldn't be building houses where there weren't schools to serve the kids, and that maybe all of it ought to work together in a little better fashion. That wasn't particularly popular with some segments of the community, but at the end of the day, people appreciate it because, you know, if you detach yourself from re-election, and by the way, let me say a thank you to all of you here who are public servants today, from school board to state legislature to city council and mayoral jobs. It all matters at all levels. And by the way, no more fun job than being mayor of Orange County. And I've been to the top of the mountain, but that was the most fun of all. So anyway, That, to me, is the essence of public service, and that's how it really should be done. I think once we get into public life thinking that we've got to hang on to the seat, and that our life will never be the same if we go back to being a private citizen, and that we just got to get reelected, that's when things go off the rails. You know? And so I think that, to me, if I had a lesson that I could impart, is that public life ought to be the way it was really intended to be. Go serve, go do some good, make a difference, and then perhaps move on and go back to being a normal citizen. And so it's in that detachment that you can have the independence to do what you think is right. And like I said, sometimes that isn't altogether popular, but it is what we need to do in order to do right for the country. And that is too much of what is wrong with Washington today. Too many people are more concerned about the next election than they are about the next generation. And I think that vision, that long-term vision, is really lacking. And so we need people that are willing to serve, but that are really willing to say, I'm going to do what is right. I'm going to do what is in the long-term interest of our country. And that's really where I think the essence of what is wrong in Washington today is with us. I was just in Washington the last 2 days. I just got back last night. I go back every now and then just to be reminded why I'm so glad I live in Orlando. And my friends up there tell me, man, you look so relaxed. You look younger. What have you done? Well, guess what? So, what about Washington? And I got to tell you, first and foremost, I'm a great believer in America, and I still am. And one of the saddest things that I find is when people stop me and ask me and say, I've been watching House of Cards. Is it really like that? And I go, man, are you kidding me? It can't be possibly that bad, you know? I mean, it's not even close. Although House of Cards is very interesting, and every now and then you say, oh gosh, I remember somebody who was just like that. But anyway, it is that the whole thing's way off in the extremes. But people really do have a sense that there's a lot of corruption, and there's a lot of backroom dealing and all of that. And truly, I got to tell you, there's a lot of very dedicated people in Washington. And there are some bad apples, and every now and then they sort of rise, and you can see what happens with them. But the majority of people are very dedicated people who want to do a good job. I'd say their biggest flaw is that sometimes they want to stay in the job more than they want to serve, you know, and they want to be in there for the next election and all of that. And so sometimes that is the one place where I think so many go wrong, really. But the bottom line is that we have a great country, we have a great democracy, and we have a great opportunity for this country to be the greatest nation on earth yet again in the next century. But you know, it's not a God-given right. I mean, we are a special nation, and we are a nation under God, but that doesn't mean that we can't screw it up. That doesn't mean that we cannot just kind of look the other way and forget about it all, and it's just going to continue to be the greatest nation in the world. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese just made a deal on gas. That's important. And you know why it's important? Because it diminishes the United States' position in the world and our ability to control our own destiny. Now, I'm not saying by that it's not good to their friends. I think that's great. But we, yet again, need to continue to put ourselves first. America, in my view, is a force for good in the world. When I was in office, and I served in the Foreign Relations Committee or in an Armed Services Committee, there was a lot of tough decisions that had to be made during my time in Washington. You know, we lived through 9/11. I was in the United States Cabinet during 9/11. And I was just, my wife, Kitty, bless her heart, I gave her for Christmas a little box that I bought at Colonial Photo Hobby. And as many pictures as you can put in that box, they'll digitize for you for $300. Well, you know, I thought that was a pretty good deal, so I got her a box. So Kitty has been, for the last month, every waking moment she doesn't have something else to do, going through our pictures. And so it's really been a wonderful reminder for us to think back about these years in public life. And I can remember, you know, when we first got to the cabinet and first were in Washington, and how fun it is to be a part of an ongoing new administration. 2001, the world looked a little rosier. Every Democrat within 100 miles was so happy to see us in Washington. I'm sorry, every Republican, because the Democrats were now gone. And you know, that's what happens. And so, oh my gosh, it's so great to have you people here. This is wonderful. And you're at the beginning of a new administration. And I remember one time talking to President Bush 41, Dad Bush, and having him say, every administration, every presidency is challenged. And here at the beginning of this administration, You don't know what your challenges are going to be yet, but they're going to come, and sure enough they will. And so, as prophetic as he was, 9/11 did happen. I'm Secretary of Housing and Urban Development at that time. We lived through that momentous day that all of us remember exactly where we were and exactly what we did. I got whisked away to a cave in West Virginia where there was a whole city under a mountain. And that's where the government would operate in case of a cataclysmic situation. We had no idea what we were facing. The president was flying around the country. He was ultimately back in Washington. And that night, at some point, we got the all clear. We were able to go back to our families. But the world changed at that moment. Everything was different from then on. And as easy as it is for us to forget, by the way, I mean, as we hear these debates about how much secrecy and how much, you know, I'll tell you what, here's my cell phone. If I'm ever talking to a terrorist in Pakistan, I don't care if you tap my phone. I want you to tap my phone. Because for me, somebody stole it and was talking to somebody back. But you know, and that is at the essence of what this debate is all about. I don't want to digress on that. And I know there are different points of view about those things, and they're important. Because we do have a democracy, we do have a constitution. But does not forget the lessons of 9/11 and what happened to our nation on that day. There's a memorial being dedicated just in the last few days to that. One of my jobs was to help rebuild Lower Manhattan. And $1 billion was appropriated by our government to HUD, through HUD, to go to Lower Manhattan. And by the way, here's a little side anecdote of Washington and the bureaucracy. We get the $1 billion appropriated by the Congress. The whole reason for this money is to ensure that life in Lower Manhattan doesn't disappear, that we can keep the flower shop and the bakery and the laundromat and the dry cleaners. I mean, you know, all of these small businesses that fed from all the activity that was going on there from completely dying. As this site that now has been a place of destruction and death is being excavated, they're digging people, they're doing whatever they're doing there, and all these businesses are beginning to die. So this money is to infuse this place with economic activity, with help from the government, to keep things going and until we can rebuild. And so the bureaucracy, some of the folks at HUD would tell me, well, we can't do this, it's going to take at least 90 days. I said, it's not going to take 90 days. This money's supposed to be there next month, and we got to get it immediately. And I remember, you know, because sometimes you just got to act, you know, and this is right after 9/11, and we're all trying to do what we think is the right thing. And they're telling me that, you know, that they can't possibly process this money because these regulations and this other bureaucratic matter and the signature from here and another signature from there, and we got to wait 30 days for this, 60 days for that. And I basically said, look, you bring to me whatever it is I need to sign for you to put this money out to Lower Manhattan in the next 2 weeks. And they did. And I said, it's not your fault, it's not your problem, you didn't do it, I did it. Just bring it to me and I'll sign it. And then I called the White House and told them what I was doing, and I said, thank you, move it on. But this is the kind of stuff that needs to happen in Washington a little more of. And it happens at a time of crisis, frankly. It just doesn't happen every other day. And so, you know, moving on from that, it was a difficult time. It was a time of a lot of challenges and a lot of confusion. And obviously, a lot of our most precious of our citizens, those that serve and wear the uniform, began to go overseas in very difficult situations. And so as the country was transformed through all of that, we in the cabinet lived through those days. I then lived through a different set of questions and issues in the Senate, you know, whether to reauthorize the Patriot Act, whether we were doing the right things by all of these challenges and all of these complicated problems that we were dealing with. And then, of course, a Great Recession hit. So when I tell you that we were there at very difficult times, it was a really challenging time. I mean, I can digress in any number of stories in all of this, but the fact is that, you know, the Great Recession, October of 2008, we had to make some very difficult decisions, some very difficult choices, whether to do TARP. It's a term most people have now forgotten, and the government had to do TARP. We did an appropriation that allowed for the banks to be stabilized, for the financial system to be stabilized. It kind of annoys me a little bit when I hear that it was to bail out Wall Street. It wasn't to bail out Wall Street, it was to bail out Main Street, because, you know, everybody that knew anything about what was happening was telling me that in a week or two, your ATM would not have worked on Main Street, downtown St. Cloud. It just wouldn't have worked, because there was such a lack of confidence in credit. there was a lack of liquidity in the markets, that it was going to shut us all down completely. So that was a tough vote, and one that I'm sure some people in this room would probably disagree with. The fact of the matter is, if you knew what I knew then, that's the vote you would have taken. Unless you knew that I was voting that way, it was going to pass, and then you didn't have to take the vote, because people back home might not understand, you know. So anyway, and that was true too. I said, geez, thanks for voting for that. I know you're doing the right thing, but I couldn't vote for it, you know, so I may lose re-election. So anyway, that's part of what I'm trying to tell you. And so, you know, fast forward to the end of my time there and to what is going on until today, and we have this incredible amount of gridlock, an incredible amount of inability to work together to tackle any of the pressing, difficult issues we face. We have a huge issue with our debt. We haven't heard much about it of late because it's kind of become a secondary matter to the issues of the day. Huge problems with our healthcare delivery system. I'm not sure that what we did is a solution, but by the same token, that doesn't mean that issues were not there with affordability, which to me was the greatest single thing that we did not address in the Obamacare Act, which is the issue of affordability and cost. Our health system is the greatest in the world, but it's much too expensive. And we've got to find ways that we can bring costs within some measure of control, because at the end of the day, that is the bigger problem. All Obamacare did was expand coverage without doing anything about the cost of care. And so in expanding coverage, that's going to cost more. And if you don't do something about the cost of health care, just wait until this summer when you're going to see tremendous rises in premiums for health care. It's coming. Insurance people have told me this. And so it doesn't mean that some of these problems don't beg for a solution. It means that we need people that are courageous enough to take the difficult decisions that need to be taken. And so I was asked to talk a little bit about politics too, and I will tell you that we have a really interesting election coming up. The Republican Party's primaries are going on now. The Republican primaries are more exciting than the Democrat ones, because we have this conflict within our party, which is working itself out in the democratic way that it should. And people's voices are heard, and sometimes they prevail, and sometimes someone else prevails. But we got to stay involved in the system. We got to continue to believe in what we believe in, and continue to advance the ball so that our democracy can continue to be re-nourished by yet another generation of leaders that comes into office. And so a very interesting election is coming up in 2014. If I had to handicap and forecast, and everybody likes to hear about that, right? I would say that the Republicans will clearly keep the House. A good chance that Republicans will take over the Senate, but it's a little iffy, because Republicans have to win 6 seats. I'm speaking in the third term, but I'm really a Republican, I should tell you. But I'm trying to tell you pretty objectively what I really see happening. Whether the Republicans could hold the seat in Georgia, Saxby-Chambliss' seat. I was just with Saxby, a good friend and a wonderful senator, and a great loss to the Senate that he's retiring. But he saw how much fun I was having, and he decided he was going to retire too. So I feel guilty about that now. But anyway, but he's, he tells me that either one of these two gentlemen that was in the runoff would have a real good chance, but it's going to be a close race. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in Georgia. Another one that's going to be very interesting to see what happens with is also the one in Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell has a challenge, and that's going to be a close race. So you've been hearing about that in the news. I frankly got to tell you, I believe Mitch McConnell will win re-election about as handily as he won the primary. Maybe not 25 points, but he's going to win re-election, I do believe. And so then there's a number of other Senate races going on around the country. And here's the prediction I'm going to make for you, and watch and see whether I was right or not in January. If I was right, invite me back and give me another free lunch. If I was wrong, invite me back and give me a free lunch and tell me I was wrong. But here's my prediction to you. I really believe that in that situation, a controlled Senate and House by Republicans, and President Obama in the last 2 years of his term, and I think most people would say, well, that's a prescription for disaster. I'm here to tell you they're going to get a lot done. And here's why. Mitch McConnell will be leading the Senate. Harry Reid has been, this is not a partisan statement. He's just a miserable leader of the Senate, okay? He is not someone that plays well in the sandbox. It's his way or the highway, and, it's just not been a good thing. And McConnell, who's also a crafty politician and could have his own moments when I would have disagreed with him and how he's doing things, I really do think has a great interest and a political self-interest in getting some things done. And so out of self-interest, if not patriotic interest. I think the Republican Congress will try to get legislation done on things like our debt problem, on things like immigration reform, on things like a reform of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, GSE reform, mortgage finance reform, any number of other things that are out there pending, that have been pending for some time, that need to get done. And I think if the Republican Congress presents those to the president and they're not super extreme to one side or the other, but kind of hit it down the middle, the president will be very hard pressed not to sign them into law, and then he also will be looking at wanting some sort of legacy, something that got done during his time in office. And so I think it could be a very productive couple of years, and I believe that in that is the hopefulness that I think all of us should always feel about our country. Because as you travel the world, I assure you there is no greater democracy, there are no greater people. We have an incredible amount of ingenuity and know-how that is expressed by what happens right here in this Chamber of Commerce. And I think out of all of that, we'll see a renewal of the American spirit, because it happens and it continues to happen. And it, like I said, it's not automatic, but it can happen, because we're great people, we have great institutions, and compared to the rest of the world, we're doing pretty darn good. And you know, I think that Winston Churchill said America will ultimately do the right thing after they've attempted every other thing. And I think there's really a lot of truth in that. And so with that, let me just kind of stop here. I didn't talk about Florida politics that I was mentioned. Maybe we can go to questions, and if you want to hear about Florida a little bit, I'll talk to you about that.
I get some questions for you. First, how about a round of applause? You got your call sign for the Secret Service?
Oh, well, when I was in the cabinet, we get protection from, for our time there, and obviously the president needs to be able to reach to his cabinet and all of that. So the Secret Service gave us all code names. My code name was Forward Look. And I thought it was kind of visionary of them to name me Forward Look. It could have been Backward Glance or any number of other things. I thought Forward Look was pretty good. So it was good enough that I named my boat Forward Look.
I was just wondering, I would like to find out, what advice would you give in the current political climate in Washington, the way that they're imposing their will of it, for the small business owner, for the people in this room here? If you were to give a piece of advice for the future, what would that be? Would it stay strong? I mean, what would be the message for us? Give us some hope.
Well, I give you a message in a couple of ways. Number one, I think you're living in a state where there's a tremendous environment for business. You know, we have no income tax. We have a lower regulatory scheme than most any other state. You're in a growth state. I mean, when I was HUD secretary, I'd go to places like Syracuse, New York, and their problem was that they were depopulating. They were trying to figure out what to do with schools to close them, at the same time that I'm battling down here when I was mayor to figure out what we're going to do with the growth, like you're doing today. You know, and so you're in a growth market, you're in a good area, low regulation, no income taxes. Now, the federal government does get in your hair a little bit. I don't know why I use that term with you, but anyway. Just came to mind, you know. So we want the federal government out here. But you know, I think you do need to stay strong, and I would say stay involved. Because the politics are only as good as the people that get in them. Whether you want to run for office or support a good person to run for office, be involved in the process. And if you're not involved in the process with a candidate, be involved in your business. You know, NFIB, the U.S. Chamber, your chamber. Do a fly into Washington. Go tell your representatives what you think needs to happen in order to make your life better. You know, healthcare is a problem, I know. It's a huge problem. And I don't want to get too partisan here, but you know, the Obamacare, I think by all counts, needs to be severely amended, if not completely repealed. You know, and it just needs to happen. And that, it was just a bad idea, badly executed. Let me tell you something else about Obamacare. One of the fundamental reasons why that isn't happening, and there's no acceptance of it, is because it was jammed down the throats of the Congress on a finagle vote at the last minute to get the Senate to approve it, without a single Republican supporting it. And they say, well, you know, Republicans won't support anything. Republicans won't support anything if you go on the TV and you say, well, we're not getting any Republican support because they don't care about people. They want people to die. They don't care about health care. They want nobody to have health care, you know. And you go talk like that 1 minute, and then you'll say, hey, come over and let's talk about how we make a better healthcare system. That's not the way you do it. You have to somehow bring people together, show some leadership, take some risk as the leader. And by the way, there's only one place where leadership happens in Washington, and that's at the White House. And the leader that occupies that seat is the only one that can really convene people and bring people together, and in a bipartisan way. Now, there's blame to go around. I'm not going to just suggest to you that it all lies at the feet of the president. There's blame to go around everywhere. But we've got to work on health care, because I know for sure that's impacting your business. And like that, you know, a climate that is accepting of small, medium, and large businesses. I work for a big bank, for a big business. But my bank is a big bank, it's a big Wall Street bank, but it's also the bank up the street, you know, the blue Chase sign, that's our bank, and we're making loans to people like you. And so it's really not about dividing, but about uniting. Not about how we can create division between big business, little business, between, frankly, white, black, between rich, poor. The greatness of this country, what I got away from in Cuba, is that it isn't about who's good and who's bad, who's evil. And we're Americans. We got to pull together as a country so that all of us can make this country better for the next generation.
Senator Martinez, you are a wonderful example of someone who's come from another country and become an American success story. When is Washington going to solve our immigration issues? We talk about a lot of things, but we don't talk about that enough, and I think it's so important. And you standing here today are a prime example of everything that's good.
I worked mightily on it for two different times, in 06 and 07. I was with Lindsey Graham during this recent trip to Washington, and he worked on it both times. I had great political risk, by the way. It was in South Carolina. Not exactly, we're not talking Miami there, you know? And so, I mean, he's taking a lot of shots. And so he was there with me when we worked on it, and he was saying, you know, I hope we don't have to do it again in 15. I hope we can still get it done this year. And I think there is a window of hope in July that perhaps it could get done. I got to tell you, I worked on that issue not because I'm some big immigrant advocate or whatever. When I started, I became kind of one because it was thrust upon me. But I started working on that issue because the tourism industry, hospitality, restaurant, because of the citrus industry, vegetables and other agricultural interests in Florida, and because of home building and construction, all of whom, regardless of what our unemployment is, need labor. And that labor today, yesterday, and probably next year is being supplied by people that come here from other places. And so we've got to develop, obviously we've got to secure our border. Obviously we cannot allow people to come and go as they will. You know what else we got to fix? It's a hidden fact. 40% of every illegal person living in this country today did not jump the fence over the Rio Grande, landed at McCoy Airport or Miami International or wherever they land with a visa and overstayed their visa. 40%. Okay? And those people come from all over the world. They're not all Latin Americans, they're not all Mexicans, they're not all Guatemalans or Nicaraguans or whatever. These are people from all over the world that come here and overstay their visa. So we need a system. I mean, we know how to do it with the credit cards, right? Why can't we have a system that clearly delineates when a person came, when they're supposed to leave, and when they overstay their visa, we know how to find them. You know, that should happen. So we got to get all that straight. But then our country also needs this workforce. And at times like 2009, our workforce needs were not as great as they were in 2005, or as they're starting to be again. And so we got to have a guest worker program that we regulate, where people don't have to come to work here and stay, but where they can come and they can go back to their country, where they can come and take money back to their families. And they can maintain those family relationships. And they don't necessarily become immigrants, but they become guest workers. They come, they work for a period of time and go back. When the economy falters, we reduce the number of guest workers that come. So to have that kind of flexibility. I think also for the long term, we need to fix, at the other end of the spectrum, the high tech. We bring people here from all over the world, we give them a PhD, and then we say, and be gone within the next 36 hours, because you're done. We just gave you your degree. You're now, go back to India and compete with us, when they would love to stay here. So at that end of the spectrum, we also would do well to reform our system where we can keep some of the world talent that wants to be here, wants to live here, wants to contribute here, because they can create here. And so that also needs to be fixed. And And so honestly, I think it's a crying shame that we've had it linger for so long, that it becomes such a divisive issue, that people use it as a political football on the right and on the left. People like the shouting. I mean, you know, I'm to the point where, thank goodness for Fox News from my side of the aisle, but I'm sick of MSNBC and I'm sick of Fox. I want to hear something that's telling me what it really is happening, not just what I want to hear, and not just to have a debate. Not just to have two people with opposing point of view go there and, like, you know, like meat to be fed. So, you know, and so the Senate bill is very close to what I worked on. I think it's a good bill. I think it should be what we ultimately approve. Path to citizenship. It's going to take people 13 years to become citizens. They're going to have to pay fines. They're going to have to learn English. They're going to have learn civics. I mean, you know, so Lindsey Graham, who's a funny guy, he said, you know, some of my kin in South Carolina couldn't pass all those tests. He said, some of those speak English. And we can get crazy. I'll tell you a funny anecdote that he was reminding me of when we were chatting. He said, you know, at the height of this thing, 2007, everybody had amendments to the bill, and they wanted to make it tougher and more difficult, and so somebody had an amendment to Social Security. And when I got to reading it, this is in the Republican caucus, I just got up and said, you know, I came legally, I'm a citizen, been a citizen for now 40 years or something, and under this bill, I wouldn't get my Social Security when I retire. And so, you know, we can get a little carried away with that, you know. So anyway, I got to tell you, I think our country needs to control our borders. We need to be in control of who comes and who goes. But we have a reality. We got a ton of people that are here, and somehow we need to make them be a part of the system, and not necessarily give them a citizenship tomorrow, but somehow earn it. And that's not amnesty. Amnesty would be to say, okay, you're here, it's all forgotten, don't worry about a thing. You know, it's amnesty would be if that's what we were doing. And by the way, to do nothing is to say de facto amnesty. You're here. You know, they're not going anywhere. Anyway, so I hope we can solve it. It really is something that begs for a solution. That is a huge issue. I think the debt is another huge issue. We've put it off. We got to deal with it. I hope in January, you know, there'll be the courage to deal with it. But one of the real problems in Washington, by the way, is that we go from one election to the next, and we can't ever do anything because there's an election coming up. And the election doesn't, you know, we're already in the presidential cycle. My goodness, you know. So anyway, so people ask me all the time. Nobody's asked, but I'll ask myself: is Jeb going to run or not? And is Hillary going to run or not? Right? I don't know. But my gut tells me Jeb is going to run. My gut tells me that Jeb is running.
Folks, how about the St. Cloud Chamber thank you for our speakers.